Alarms tore through Threshold Station at 3 in the morning, and I woke up already running. Red light spilled through my window. The floor shook under my feet. Somewhere below me, on the lower docking ring, something had gone very wrong, and the whole station knew it. I grabbed my jacket and my badge and ran into the hallway, where dozens of other people were doing the same thing, half-dressed, eyes wide, voices sharp with questions nobody could answer. A voice from the ceiling speakers said the words nobody wanted to hear. Hull breach on Ring 4. All residents moved to shelter zones immediately. Ring 4. That was where she slept. I did not think. I turned the wrong way, away from the shelter signs, and pushed through the crowd toward the lower ring, toward Ithril. 3 weeks earlier, I had said yes to a girl nobody else wanted. Her name was Ithril Vess Corin, and she came from a bloodline that made most people nervous just to stand near. Her people could feel fear and send it outward, like a stone dropped in still water, and if she panicked, everyone close to her panicked too. That was the story the station told about her family. That was why 40 sponsors before me had looked at their shoes instead of raising a hand. I had not looked at my shoes. I had raised my hand, and she had run into my arms so fast that half the room flinched, and from that day, we had been learning how to live as two people bound together, a human and a girl the galaxy called dangerous. Now the station was breaking apart around her, and I was the only person running toward the danger instead of away from it. The corridor to Ring 4 grew hotter with every step. Smoke curled along the ceiling vents. A maintenance worker ran past me shouting into a comm unit, saying something about a cargo hauler that had struck the outer hull, saying something about raiders, saying words that made my stomach fold in on itself. I kept moving. My badge still worked on the security door, which surprised me, and it slid open onto a hallway lit only by the dull orange glow of emergency strips. Ithril's door was 3 units down. It hung open, torn half off its frame, and my heart stopped for one long second before I saw her standing just inside it, alive. Her spines flared hard along her arms, her eyes wide and bright with fear. "Daniel," she said, and the relief in her voice nearly knocked me over. "You came." Of course I came. I reached for her hand. "We need to move. Now." She did not move. Her spines trembled, and I felt it then, the thing the warnings had told me about on the first day, a wave of pure fear rolling off her and into me, sharp enough to make my skin crawl and my thoughts scatter. Down the hall, 2 strangers who had been running toward the shelter zone suddenly stopped, turned, and pressed themselves against the wall, faces pale, breath short. Her fear had reached them too. "I can't," she said. "If I move, if I run, everyone near me will panic. People could get hurt. People could fall. I read the reports. I know what happened before." "That was different," I said, though I did not fully know that yet. I only knew I could not let her stand frozen in a burning hallway while a station cracked open around us. That happened because nobody stayed with her. "You are not alone this time." She looked at me, spines still flared, and I did something I had practiced every night since the day I signed her contract. Something the counselor had taught us during our first month together. I slowed my breathing on purpose. I let my shoulders drop. I looked her straight in the eye and thought about nothing, except how much I wanted her safe. How sure I was that we would get through this together, and I let that feeling sit in my chest instead of fear. The change in her was almost instant. Her spines eased back against her arms. Her breathing slowed to match mine. The wave of panic rolling off her thinned, then steadied, then turned into something else entirely, something calm and sharp and focused. Down the hall, the 2 strangers straightened up. One of them, a young man with a torn jacket, blinked like he had just woken up from a bad dream. "What was that?" he said, mostly to himself. "That was help," I said, and pulled Ithril toward the stairwell. We ran together this time, her hand locked in mine, and every person we passed in that smoke-filled corridor seemed to catch a piece of the calm she was sending out now, instead of the fear. A woman who had been sobbing against a wall stood up and started walking with purpose. A child stopped crying. It was strange, and it was wonderful. And even in the middle of chaos, I found myself thinking that the coordinator back at the bonding hall had been right. The trait cut both ways. The stairwell spat us out onto the main concourse, where station security had set up a barrier of light near the shelter doors. A woman in a gray uniform, her name tag reading Claire Whitfield, waved us through, then stopped when she saw Ithral's spines. "Corin," Whitfield said, her hand drifting toward her belt. "We need her contained, not loose in a crowd." "She is not loose," I said. "She is bonded to me, and right now, she is the only reason that hallway back there is not a stampede. Ask the people behind us." Whitfield hesitated. Behind us, the young man with the torn jacket spoke up, unprompted. "She's telling the truth," he said. "Something happened back there. I felt scared, then I didn't. It was like someone turned the panic off." Whitfield's eyes moved between us, uncertain, and then the ceiling groaned, a deep tearing sound that silenced every argument in the room. Dust sifted down from a seam in the metal above us. Somewhere far off, an alarm changed its pitch, rising into something more urgent. "Ring 4's outer plating is failing," a voice crackled over Whitfield's comm. "We have 30, maybe 40 people still trapped past the checkpoint. Evacuation team is pinned down by smoke and heat. We need eyes in there, and fast." Whitfield looked at the shelter door, then at the corridor behind us, then at Ithral. "You said you can calm people," she said, quiet now, all the suspicion drained out of her voice, replaced with something closer to desperation. "Can you calm 40 of them at once?" Ithral's spines twitched, uncertain, and I felt her hand tighten around mine. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I have never tried anything that big." "You won't be doing it alone," I said, and I meant it. "I'll be right there." She looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that carries a whole conversation without a single word, and then she nodded. We went back into the smoke together, Whitfield and 2 of her security officers behind us, flashlights cutting narrow paths through the haze. The heat grew worse the deeper we went, and twice we had to step around scorched metal, still glowing faintly orange. I kept my hand on Ithral's shoulder the whole way, kept my breathing slow, kept my mind fixed on the plan and not the danger, because I had already learned that whatever I felt, she would carry outward to everyone near her, and right now, everyone needed calm more than they needed anything else. We found the trapped group behind a jammed cargo door, 40 people pressed together in a narrow service corridor, coughing, crying, banging on metal that would not move. The moment they saw us, a fresh wave of panic rose, voices rising into shouts, bodies pushing toward the door in a way that would only get people hurt. Ithral stepped forward before I could stop her. She did not shout over them. She stood still, in the middle of all that noise, and let her spines rise, not in fear this time, but on purpose, the way I had seen her practice in our apartment late at night, when she thought I was asleep. And instead of throwing panic outward, she threw calm, deliberate and steady, like a hand placed flat against a shaking chest. The corridor went quiet within seconds. Not silent, not eerie, just quiet, in the way a room goes quiet when everyone in it takes a breath at the same time. The banging on the door stopped. The shouting dropped to murmurs. An older man near the back sat down slowly against the wall and put his head in his hands, not from fear anymore, but from sheer relief. "Now," Ithral said, her voice steady, "we can get everyone out safely, one at a time. No pushing." Whitfield's team worked fast once the panic broke, prying the jammed door open with a hydraulic tool, while Ithral held the calm steady across the whole group, her hand never leaving mine, her focus never wavering even as sweat ran down her face, and her breathing grew ragged with effort. I could feel how much it cost her, a kind of tiredness that settled into my own bones even though it was not mine to carry, and I understood then why the counselor had told us bonding was not something you did for company. It was something you did because someone needed an anchor, and anchors do not get to let go halfway through the storm. One at a time, the trapped people filed out through the widened gap in the door, coughing but alive, and moved past us toward the checkpoint and the waiting shelter doors. The old man who had sat down against the wall paused in front of Ithral before he left. He looked at her spines, then at her eyes, and something in his face changed, the fear replaced by something closer to gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, and walked on. Ithral's spines dropped flat, and I felt her knees buckle. I caught her before she hit the floor, and for a moment, the whole corridor tilted around me, the adrenaline of the last 20 minutes draining out all at once, leaving only exhaustion and the ringing silence after chaos. "You did it," I said into her hair. "You got them all out." "We got them out," she said, her voice thin but steady. "I couldn't have held that long alone." Whitfield's team finished clearing the corridor, and the emergency crews moved in behind them to seal the breach with foam sealant that hissed and hardened against the tear in the hull plating. Within an hour, the alarms shifted from a rising wail to a slow, steady tone, the signal that the danger had passed. The lights along the concourse flickered back to their normal white, replacing the emergency orange, and for the first time since I had woken up running, I let myself breathe all the way out. We sat together on a bench near the checkpoint, wrapped in the thin silver blankets the medical team handed out to everyone who had been near the breach. Ithral leaned against my shoulder, spines finally at rest, eyes half closed with exhaustion. Whitfield walked over, her uniform smudged with soot, and crouched in front of us. "I filed 100 reports on Corin bondings before tonight," she said. "Every one of them said the same thing. High risk, contain and monitor. I never once read a report that said what I saw down there." "Maybe nobody ever stayed long enough to see it," I said. Whitfield studied Ithral for a long moment, then reached out and offered her hand. "The way you offer a hand to someone you respect, not someone you fear. 40 people are alive because you didn't run," she told her. "I'm putting that in my report too." Ithral shook her hand, her fingers still trembling slightly, and a small, tired smile crossed her face. The first real smile I had seen from her all night. 2 days later, a message arrived on my datapad, calling us to an emergency council hearing on the upper ring. I read it twice before I understood what it meant. Someone on the station council wanted to reopen the question of whether Ithral should be allowed to stay bonded and free, or whether she should be moved into a monitored containment unit until investigators finished studying what had happened during the breach. Ithral went very still when I read her the message. Her spines did not flare, not this time, but I felt a small tremor pass through her hand where it rested in mine, the kind of fear that had nowhere left to run. "They can't do that," I said. "Not after what you did." "They can try," she said quietly. "People are more afraid of what they don't understand than grateful for what saved them. I have seen it before." We walked into the council chamber together the next morning, and the room was fuller than I expected. Station officials, a few reporters, and near the front, a council member named Peter Grant, a tall man with a clipped voice and a reputation for caution bordering on suspicion. He stood as soon as we entered and did not wait for the formal opening of the hearing. "I have reviewed the incident reports," Grant said, addressing the room more than us. "What we have is a Corin bloodline individual who, by her own admission, projected an emotional effect across an entire corridor of station residents without their consent. That the effect happened to be calming this time does not change what it is. Influence over another person's mind, whether it soothes or frightens, is still influence they did not choose. I move that Ward Vescorin be placed under monitored containment until a full review is complete." A murmur ran through the room. I felt my pulse rise, and beside me, Ithral's hand tightened around mine, her spines pressing flat against her arms, the same defensive posture I had seen the night we met. I stood before anyone could call a vote. "I was in that corridor," I said, my voice louder than I meant it to be. So was Security Officer Claire Whitfield, and so were the 40 people who walked out of it alive. None of us asked for calm the way you might ask for a favor, no. But none of us asked to be trapped behind a jammed door in a burning corridor either. And I have not heard anyone in this room complain about which one of those two things actually happened to them. Grant's jaw tightened. Emotions used well can still be misused. What happens the day a Corin decides calm is not what a crowd needs. "What happens," Ithral said, standing beside me, her voice steadier than I expected, "is the same thing that happens when any person decides to lie, or to threaten, or to hurt someone with words instead of feelings. You judge the person, not the whole bloodline. I did not choose what I was born able to do. I choose what I do with it. 3 weeks ago, nobody in this station would give me that choice. Last week, I chose to hold a corridor of strangers together instead of letting fear tear it apart. I would like to be judged on that choice, not on a fear that has not happened yet. The room was quiet. Whitfield stood from her seat near the back, still in uniform, and asked to speak. The council chair nodded. "I have spent 12 years on this station's security team," Whitfield said. "I have seen fear spread through a crowd like fire more times than I want to remember, and I have never once seen anyone stop it the way she did that night. If containment is meant to protect this station, then the safest thing I saw in that corridor was her, not the walls around her." Grant looked around the room, searching for support that did not come. One by one, heads turned away from him. Not in the old way, not the way 40 sponsors had once looked at their shoes to avoid choosing Ithril, but in a new way, a room quietly choosing not to punish someone for a fear that had already been proven wrong. The council chair called for a vote, and the motion for containment failed, 12 votes against, 3 in favor. Grant sat down without another word, his face unreadable, and the chair moved the hearing to a formal close, thanking Ithril for her testimony, and, almost as an afterthought, for her actions during the breach. Outside the chamber, Ithril let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since we walked in. Her spines eased slowly back into place, and when I put my arm around her shoulders, she leaned into it without hesitation, the fear finally draining out of her posture. "You didn't need me in there," I said. "You did that on your own." "I needed you there," she said. "I always will. That part doesn't change, no matter how many hearings I win." News of the breach, and of the hearing that followed it, spread through the station over the next 2 days, the way news always does, faster and louder than the truth deserves. But this time, the story that spread was not the one I expected. It was not a story about a dangerous bloodline loose in a crisis. It was a story about a girl who had held a corridor of frightened strangers together, with nothing but her own steady mind, and the hand of the man who refused to let go of her. People I had never met stopped us in the concourse to say thank you. A woman from the medical team, a soft-spoken nurse named Grace Bennett, asked Ithril if she would consider training with the emergency response crew, since a calming presence like hers could save lives in every future crisis the station might face. Ithril looked at me before she answered, checking, the way she always did in those early weeks, as if she still expected me to change my mind about her. I never did. "I would like that," she told Grace, and for the first time since the day I met her, she said it without a single flicker of fear in her spines. A week after the breach, the station held a small ceremony in the same hall where the bonding program had first placed us together. It was not a grand event, just a gathering of the people whose lives had crossed with ours that night. The old man from the corridor, the young man with the torn jacket, Whitfield in a clean uniform this time, Grace with a datapad full of training schedules. They had asked me to say a few words, and I stood at the front of that same dais where Ithril had once waited alone, while 40 sponsors looked at their shoes. I did not have a long speech prepared. I looked out at the small crowd, then down at Ithril standing beside me, her spines calm and steady, her eyes bright in a way I had never seen on the day we met. 3 weeks ago, I said, this station called her dangerous. Last week, she held 40 strangers together in a burning corridor and got every single one of them out alive. The only thing that changed in between was that somebody decided to stay. I looked at her, and she looked back at me, and I felt it then. Not fear, not panic, but something warm and certain passing between us, the kind of feeling that does not need a translator to understand. "I'm glad I raised my hand," I said. The room was quiet for a moment, and then it was not, filled instead with the sound of people clapping, people who 3 weeks earlier would have looked away. Ithril slipped her hand into mine, the same way she had on the first day, only steadier now, surer, like a hand that had finally found the place it was always meant to be. "So am I," she said, and for the first time in either of our lives, neither of us was afraid at all.